If you had to take a guess, what would you say is the most popular first-person shooter game on consoles right now? Well, I think 99% would say Call of Duty Modern Warfare. It just has to be. But when it comes to some of the most popular shooters on PC at the moment, there is a slightly different tale. Escape from Tarkov has recently had a big push into the spotlight, and a huge amount of players, streamers, and content creators have all jumped in and started to play the game and understand why it's growing in popularity. And when I think about it, I don't reckon the console market has a game like that at all. If we look at some of the most popular hardcore shooters on PC, how many of those are also on console? One that is Rainbow Six Siege, but some that aren't: Squad, Hell Let Loose, Insurgency Sandstorm, Escape from Tarkov, the list goes on. And those are all really popular shooters on PC at the moment, and they offer up very different experiences from your standard Call of Duty, CSGO, or even something like Battlefield. However, most of these games are not yet on console. There are plans in place for Insurgency Sandstorm to make its console debut as well, and that's due to happen in the spring. The main reason this topic came up in my mind though is because all of the talk of the next generation consoles. We know that the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X are going to launch towards the end of this year, October, November I'd guess, and with that brings a lot of opportunity for new games. And if these specs and details of these consoles are to be believed, then these next gen units are pretty powerful. They're basically high-end PCs, and that changes things a lot. I will get onto the whole control scheme issue in a bit, but I absolutely think the console market is missing out on some of those slower paced tactical shooters, and I reckon that in next gen, those type of games could be huge on console. So games like Call of Duty, well, they're always going to be popular. There's a certain player base there that will buy the game year on year no matter what. It's an arcade shooter that you can jump into and out of really easily. Do you want to play for 20 minutes? That's fine, hop in, get a few rounds in, and then you can go do something else, get on with your day. Games like that will always have a place, low recoil, easy to manage game mechanics, and no real downside to being killed. You respawn and away you go again. Of course, Fortnite is one of the most popular games on console too, and that does have an element of risk to it. You die and you have to jump into another game, but it's also a very fast-paced arcade shooter. On the other side of the spectrum though is a game like Escape from Tarkov. It's gained huge popularity recently due to a number of reasons. One of those is that the Twitch drops were available for watching various streamers play the game, but also because more streamers and content creators were playing the game and realizing that there was something enjoyable there. And they were sticking around, and I'm sure that more players were picking up the game for the first time too. So Tarkov is a extremely slow-paced, methodical shooter. You need to manage your inventory before you think about going into a game, and that takes time. And then when you're in a game, make one mistake and you're dead. All your gear's gone apart from whatever you had in your gamma case, or maybe you'll get something back from insurance. It's punishing as hell and you die quickly. You can take all sorts of damage from limbs, bleeding, and of course just outright death. Even the weapons themselves have all sorts of attachments that you need to consider, as well as different ammo types. There's different quests you can do, there's player progression, XP, there's even a marketplace. The bottom line though is that Tarkov for me is a very satisfying game to play, but there is a huge learning curve. And that's the point, and it makes those times when you succeed even more satisfying. And for the most part, you aren't just going to hop in for 20 minutes. It's one of those games that you tend to sit down and play for hours. It's more of a FPS MMO RPG hybrid in my opinion. And it makes for a good watch as well for viewers, because if you're watching it, you know there's something at stake if it all goes wrong. You don't just respawn without any negative effects. Other than PUBG, Siege and Hunt Showdown on Xbox, I'd say that they're more realistic tactical games if you wanted to call them that. Consoles don't have anything like Tarkov, and I'd argue that PUBG maybe comes the closest in terms of recoil control and how quickly you can die, but they are vastly different games. And I've noticed that during the recent influx of viewers for Tarkov on streams and in YouTube comments, many of them have been asking the question, when is this coming out on console? Well, of course I don't have an answer for that, and maybe this game will never reach console. There's no word on even if it's planned. There would be a few hurdles to overcome though, you would imagine. In the past, one of the biggest hurdles for these type of beautiful looking tactical games was to get them to run well on a console. Well, I don't think that will be an issue anymore with the next gen hardware. Consoles are powerful machines, and the next gen are promising to push native 4K at 60 FPS and even 8K, although I'll believe it when I see it. Surely these sort of tactical games though could easily make that leap now. Yeah, maybe they wouldn't run that very well or even look good on an Xbox One or PS4, but when you talk next gen and you look at the generational leap in hardware, you start to believe that it could be true. With something like Hunt Showdown, it's already out on Xbox and it's coming out on PlayStation 4 soon, but there'd be nothing stopping Crytek, who are the developers of that game, from doing a next gen version of it too that runs better and looks better. There'd be a massive player base there for it. Having said that, I think we do have to consider a few things. Certain games, like Tarkov and even Sandstorm to some degrees, don't always run well on a high-spec PC. Sandstorm has got better, but both of those games do have a tendency to get poor performance quite consistently. You just hope that on the next-gen consoles they will be able to at least maintain a solid 60 FPS, but that would probably require a lot of coding and optimization. The biggest issue I can see here though is what I'm sure a lot of people would have already been thinking about: the controls. If we stick with Tarkov for example, it's a very control heavy game on PC. You press B to switch between firing modes, you press L to inspect your weapon, press Alt and T to make your character take out the mag and estimate the remaining ammo. The list goes on and on. There's a ton of different controls and key bindings here. This is a tactical shooter, and as such, even on a keyboard, there are a lot of keybinds. How on earth do you translate that over to a console? Well, the first thing I would say is this: controllers have definitely changed recently. I'm not sure if they were first, but SCUF controllers were really popular before the Xbox Elite controller was released. The custom controllers offered extra paddles at the back, custom trigger stops, all the things that we see in the Xbox Elite controller of today. I imagine when the next Xbox releases, an Elite controller of sorts will be normal and come bundled with the console itself. Even Sony have released an attachment for the current DualShock controller that adds extra paddles at the back, and presumably when the next gen PS5 releases, this will be built in and standard, much like with the Elite. This means that if those controllers do become the norm, there are at least a few more buttons to play with. When it comes to the PlayStation 4, it of course has a touchpad in the middle that, to be honest, doesn't really get used on all that many games. Perhaps that could be something that could aid those games. Even with 2 extra buttons though, or even 4, I do accept that there still might be a real issue here with functionality, but I really believe that with some intelligent design, it's possible. And Tarkov, for example, it's not a very quick game, so speed isn't really as important as accuracy when it comes to the inventory management. Most of that is done outside the game, and even if you're in game and let's say you're looting someone or something, you first got to examine every single item before you can see what it is. That is not a quick process. It isn't like PUBG or Apex when you can just drag everything over straight away. The other factor here is that consoles and certain games are nowadays offering up native mouse and keyboard support. The latest Call of Duty, I think, is a brilliant example of that. You can even do it with something like Fortnite. And if we think about it, having that functionality solves most of the issues at play here. And you have to assume that next gen will definitely keep pushing the mouse and keyboard angle, essentially being mini PCs anyway. That means that PlayStation and Xbox players could potentially enjoy their tactical shooter on a home console with a mouse and keyboard. The problem is though, I don't think it's the right move to completely rely on. In theory, a developer like Battlestate Games, who makes Tarkov, could port the game to console, assuming people would be using a mouse and keyboard. But I'm not sure if that's feasible. I imagine any game going on to either Xbox or PlayStation has to have some element of controller support, because the majority of people will be using the controller, and so they would absolutely have to come up with a smart control design without dumbing the game down. Easier said than done. But perhaps the buttons on the back could act as a secondary function key. So press A and you get one action, but hold down one of the extra back buttons or paddles and you get a different result. These developers are smart people, and I'm sure that they could come up with some interesting concepts. Wrapping things up, I think there's been a big influx recently in the popularity of slower paced tactical games, especially on PC. I believe that players enjoy the risk reward of these games, and for people who make content centered around those games, the viewers enjoy the fact that your life matters more. Over the past few years, there's definitely been a big push for Battle Royale games, but I get the feeling that it's starting to slow down a bit. Games like Hunt Showdown and Tarkov have elements that players can relate to when it comes to Battle Royale, trying to survive against a group of players in the round with them, but they've got a very different twist and gameplay style when it comes to persistent loot, inventory management, RPG layers on top, and so much more. The only real experience I think that you can get on console right now like that is Hunt Showdown. But I suspect over the next 12 months we are going to see a lot more tactical shooters making their way onto the new consoles, and I really believe there's a huge audience waiting there. The question is, should the player base be split or should cross-play make an appearance here? I think that's a question that can only be answered by the developers themselves based on testing and knowledge from their communities. Cross-play is again something that we're starting to see more and more, and if it's done correctly, it can only enhance the player base and be a good thing. Providing you do it based on controller input, I don't see it being a big problem. If the games were out and you were using a controller on PlayStation, you would be put against other people using a controller. Play with a mouse and keyboard, and you're going to be put against people with the same gear. I think it's a good way to ensure that you've got a solid player base across all of your platforms. In closing, I honestly see the biggest hurdle that developers would have to bypass would be the control schemes. They would have to ensure that players could use a controller if they choose to, and with games like Sandstorm, that would be fine and maybe easy to do, but with something like Tarkov, that's definitely going to require a lot of thought and work, and I think it would only be possible on the newer controllers with more button functionality. If you can cross that hurdle, and I admit it's a big one, I think you'll find the console market would flock to a game like Tarkov. There's a big market there for a slower paced game, and maybe the next generation of consoles with all their horsepower and hardware can actually make that a reality. We will see. But either way, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, guys. Are you a console gamer? Would you like to see more tactical first-person shooters over there? Or are you content with games like Siege and Call of Duty? Let me know either way. And if you enjoyed today's video, do leave a like, thank you. If you didn't like it, dislike it, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.